broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this edition of Gun Guy Radio is supplied by LA Police Gear, lapolicegear.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 125 of Gun Guy Radio. This is the podcast that shines a positive light on the firearms lifestyle. I'm your host, Ryan Machad, standing in for Jake while he is on sabbatical, and this is your weekly dose of positive firearms talk without the politics. This week we have on first-time Gun Guy Radio guest Weird Beard of the Squirrel Report and of the Weird World blog to discuss the ways you can check a used handgun to help ensure that it's going to be a good purchase. So how you doing, Weird?
I am doing great.
Excellent. It's good to have you on Gun Guy Radio. So we're going to head into the announcements here before we get into the main topic. We are looking for gun and gear reviewers, bloggers, and editors for the Firearms Insider. So if you are interested in doing that, there is a link in the show notes, and you can email tj@firearmsradio.tv, and he can get back to you with how to become involved with that. And also be sure to contribute to the show by shopping Amazon.com via our affiliate banners and also using the various affiliate links that are on the show's website. So that about wraps up the announcements, and we're going to head into the main topic, which is buying used handguns. So this was a topic that we touched on my show, Handgun Radio, and we're going to kind of, discuss it a little bit further here on Gun Guy Radio. Buying a handgun doesn't really have to be a hugely expensive experience. I'm often floored by some of the suggested retail prices of some of the new handguns I see offered, and I just can't imagine spending that much money on a handgun unless I was rich, and I wish I was. Doesn't everybody? But, however, just because the new ones don't cost a lot doesn't mean you can't get a good quality handgun. And used shouldn't be a dirty word when it comes to purchasing a handgun or any firearm for that instance. If you know some of the proper ways to check for the handgun for aesthetics and function, then you can really find a great used handgun, often for a fraction of the original price. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I have never purchased a factory new handgun. All of my handguns have been bought used. So this topic is going to cover some of the ways you can check a revolver and a semi-auto pistol for function and to ensure that you get a quality used firearm. So, Weird, how often do you buy used guns? Do you buy more new or more used?
I have bought exactly 3 new handguns in my entire history of gun ownership.
Okay, so
I've never bought a single new rifle. So it's only new handguns, and those honestly were instances where it was either too good to be true or just something I wanted so bad, and I just could not find them in the used racks. And
so you more so by just focus on the used guns?
I almost exclusively focus on the used guns. I mean, the big thing someone needs to... I hear a lot of people, talking about, like, getting into handguns, especially people that are, like, budget conscious, and they start talking about, well, budget and all that, and then they shy away from used. And you got to remember that, I mean, I've got handguns that have over 100,000 rounds, and they're still running just fine. You need to do a little bit of maintenance once they start getting up to high round counts and things like that, like replacing the springs and, magazines wear out and things like that. But overall, handguns are practically good forever unless you're, a professional shooter and you're shooting, you've got ammo sponsorship and you're shooting, hundreds of rounds every single day and all of that stuff. Pretty much, I mean, you're not gonna shoot the rifling out of your barrel so long as you're cleaning it right. I mean, that's honestly speaking, if you wear the rifling out of your barrel, it's probably because you're over cleaning it. And you're not gonna shoot the gun completely horribly loose unless it's some of the cheaper offerings might end up having a shorter service life. But overall, especially your big name guns. If you buy a Colt 1911 or a Smith & Wesson revolver or all of that, those guns are going to be good for a long, long, long time. And for those of us like Ryan and I who collect surplus guns, I mean, we've got guns that are 50, 60, 100 years old, and they still work. So, the idea of buying a new gun is almost silly to me because they they do have a depreciation. As soon as you take that gun out of the case and even run 50 rounds through it, it's worth a whole lot less because now all of a sudden it is a used firearm instead of a new in-box firearm. And a lot of gun shops won't take if you buy a new gun and then you bring it back to them and go, I don't really like it. Can I get my money back? Can I get most of my money back and all that? I've seen actually a guy who bought a new handgun. I'll leave the handgun out because the handguns actually was a really good gun, but I think he got a lemon. And he shot a little while, and it didn't work for him, and he just wanted to get rid of it. He was a defensive gun, and he didn't trust it anymore. And the the shop owner did him a solid right there and said, "Look, I'll give you your money back, and I'll let you I'll give it to you in store credit, and let you get something else." But the guy the store owner probably ended up taking about $100 hit because he was not going to be able to sell that gun for the same price to the next end user. So overall, let somebody else take that depreciation. It's not like buying a used car where now it's got 100,000 miles on it. That car's not going to last as long as if you bought something brand new. It's really more like buying a used car with 50 or 100 miles on the clock.
Right, and talking about how old your guns are, for instance, my Model 60 I always talk about, the Smith & Wesson, that was from the first production run of those, I believe, starting in 1960 or 62. So, that's pretty old. And then I have a Mosin Nagant M44, which is dated 1944. So, and then that 1903 that I have in 32, the Colt, is a 1917 production year. Yep. So, these guns last, and they don't fall apart. Unless, like you said, the cheaper ones that are maybe made out of something like a weaker metal like Zamac, for instance, may have a little bit of problems with longevity. But other than that, a good quality handgun is going to last you a really long time.
Yeah, it's really practically forever. And then on top of that, also you've got another thing that wasn't in the show notes, but we should probably touch on is some guns have lifetime warranties, and it doesn't matter. It's the lifetime of the gun. And actually, I know people who have bought broken Smith & Wessons out of a used case for a song because the tag said on it not firing, and they bought it and just immediately took it home, boxed it up, sent it to Springfield. And Smith & Wesson repaired it and sent it back to them. And all of a sudden, they got a really good gun. And actually, I have a Model 617, and I bought that gun used and easily I didn't catalog the rounds because it's 22, but it's easily 100,000 rounds that I put through that gun. And finally, I shot it out of time, and I sent it back to Springfield. They sent it back in like 2 weeks. I spent $25 in shipping and got what I would consider better than a new gun back from Smith & Wesson because they had cleaned up all the internals and all of that. Plus, all the times I had pulled the trigger, everything was just mated up nicely and really smooth. So it was practically a custom gun at that point.
That's awesome. Smith is really good usually about that. I hear Ruger is pretty good, maybe sometimes a little bit lengthy in terms of turnaround time. But, most of the major companies are really good about helping you figure out how to fix your firearms. So we'll start out, we have the way to check these used handguns, and actually some of these techniques can be applied to even long guns if you were to think about it. So, don't put those out of your mind when you're thinking about these and hearing about them. But we've divided it into checking over the revolver, and that goes for single and double action, and then going over the semi-auto pistol. So we'll start out with the revolver, and Weird, anytime you want to jump in, I'll probably take a few points here, and then we'll discuss them. So it should go without saying, but check to ensure the revolver is unloaded. Now, the techniques discussed here may vary slightly from brand to brand, but in general, it can be applied to the vast majority of revolvers. So some of them may be a little bit different. The cylinder latch may be in the back on the side plate on the left-hand side, like the Smith & Wesson. They may be, forward of the cylinder, like on I believe it's the Dan Wesson and some of the Taurus guns. But so make sure it's unloaded, and give the revolver a good external inspection for scratches, dents, wear, and any other unusual things externally. If the gun's been visibly abused on the outside, then there stands to be a pretty good chance that the gun wasn't taken care of internally as well. Unless the work has been done by an established company such as like Turnbull Manufacturing or something, be wary of any refinished gun. a gun that is refinished to hide abuse or damage may also be hiding other surprises internally. So, and another really good indicator of something like that is when you're looking at the used handgun is multiple damaged screw heads. Now, one buggered up screw head may be a mistake or a slipper of the screwdriver, but multiple damaged screw heads could be indicative of someone who didn't know how to use the proper fitting screwdriver for that particular screw. And most people who know how to do proper gunsmithing work will typically always use the proper fitting screwdriver. They won't usually just use whatever's at hand. So, any thoughts on this, Weird?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's one thing. Also, another thing to point out is if somebody does a bad refinishing job, it's the same thing with a bad paint job on a car. If they put a new finish over, say, rusting metal or all that, that rust could still be going on underneath the surface, and it might pop up on you later on, like a bad penny turning up. Another thing to note is don't necessarily shy away from a gun if it's got some external wear on it. I actually really like guns that have a lot of holster wear on them. And so it's the wear that comes from a gun going in and out of a leather or a Kydex holster. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. It could mean very often you'll have to inspect it further to find out, but it could mean that gun was carried a lot but shot very little. And that is a complete diamond in the rough, because that little extra wear on the finish really isn't going to hurt the gun in the end of it. If it's a blued gun that has some bluing worn off, yeah, you're going to have to make sure that there's always a little bit of oil on the surface of it when the gun's in storage, so it doesn't end up rusting up on you. But other than that gun's going to work just fine if everything else is mint on it. But the shop's going to put a little bit of discount on it because it's not a fancy, showy gun. And I won't lie, I like guns that have a little bit of holster wear on them. They've got, I find it to be a classy look. I had a chance to handle the Beretta 92 used in the Die Hard and Lethal Weapon movies, and that gun has got all of the sharp corners are worn down on it, and shiny steel and aluminum shining through. And I think it just looks cool. And of course, the gun's shot very, very little because it's just a movie prop piece. So it probably gets maybe a few hundred rounds per movie run through it. And so that gun is in remarkably good condition, but it looks kind of beat up on the outside. So don't shy away just because there's some holster wear on the gun.
Well, like my dad's Model 19 that I have is Model 19 Smith that he carried on duty. There's a lot of holster wear down towards the muzzle. And if you look at the Pachmeyer grips that he carried, on the outside, the grips are worn smooth. The checkering on the rubber grips doesn't have any definition like it would when it was new. But on the left-hand side, it looks brand new from where his coat was rubbing, getting out of doors, stuff like that. So, but it's a great gun regardless of that. So I mean, like you said, don't knock it just because of the external wear. I mean, but anything that's looks like that it was smashed around or dropped or something like that.
Yeah, if it looks like it's been abused, it's got some deep dents in it, like it looks like it's been dropped. The crown on the crowning on the muzzle's got dings and stuff in it. Yeah, that gun's has not lived a good life, and more than likely there's other stuff underneath the surface. But also, that you added an interesting point is police departments turn in their guns, and they'll often give them to, like Glock did it when they did the big Glock revolution happened in the 80s and 90s. Is Glock pretty much just said, one for one, we'll take the Sig Sauers and Smith & Wesson revolvers and Beretta 92s that your police department's using and swap them one for one for Glock 19s or Glock 22s and all of that. And those guns just went to wholesale, got sold to wholesaler lots, and those ended up getting into dealer shelves. And if you can get your hands on, and the same thing goes with Europeans, you'll find European police guns often on American store shelves because they can't, oftentimes they can't sell them in Europe because of the gun laws there. And those guns are absolute diamonds in the rough when you can find them, because police officers, as a general rule, don't shoot their guns only when they need to qualify with them. And so that gun's just riding in a holster every single day that police officer's on duty, but it's not really getting a whole lot of hard use, and it's getting taken care of well. And they usually have an armorer at the police headquarters that'll take care of the guns. So it's going to be a really, really beautiful gun, and you're going to pay not a lot of money for it.
Well, and you think about that too. I mean, they're using maybe we'll say 300 rounds every 6 months for your average department, maybe for practice on the range, qualifying and stuff, just for the pistol, that is. So, I mean, that's not a lot of use. I mean, I know a lot of people who put 1,000 rounds a month through their handguns. I mean, that's not uncommon, especially if they're a very high-volume reloader.
Yeah, I used to put 1,000 rounds through my guns, no problem. I've kind of slowed down a little as ammo got more expensive and even reloading components. But yeah, it's not unheard of for the average shooter. And even then, it's not like any of my guns are starting to rattle or fall apart on me. They're doing just fine.
Right. So continuing on with the things you want to look at on the revolver, you look carefully at the sights on the gun, whether fixed or adjustable. Oftentimes when you drop the gun, it tends to flip over on its top sometimes, and so that will be a good indicator if the gun's been dropped or damaged, like we were talking about with the external wear. And so you may not be able to see any like minute adjustments that have happened with the naked eye to the sight. So at best you may just need to replace the sights. Now moving into the more important in terms of safety considerations is how the mechanics of the gun are working. So the cylinder should only move very slightly fore and aft in the cylinder window. And when I say very slightly, I mean extremely slightly. This is called cylinder end shake, and having excessive end shake can cause primer issues, headspace issues, and potentially a very dangerous situation in which the cylinder is unlocked. So if you're mechanically inclined, excessive end shake can be corrected by using the yoke end shake bearings from Brownells, and there is a link in the show notes to those. And they're just a bunch of small shims. They look like washers, and they're like small washers, very thin, and they can be placed inside the cylinder to correct the excessive end shake. And there are a bunch of instructional videos that can be found on YouTube regarding that process. Have you ever had any revolvers of yours with excessive end shake weird?
No, I mean, I picked up a few on the used racks, and I just didn't want to mess with them, so I put them down. But that's the first thing, is always grab that revolver and grab a hold of the cylinder and jiggle it. I mean, even better is just to shake it in your hand and just see if the revolver rattles. And if you get a rattle on a gun and you otherwise feel like it looks good, see if they've got a new one, because I know my Ruger LCRs, there's something with the sear, or it's in the manual and I didn't read it, but there are some guns that have a little bit of a rattle to them just on how they're put together, and so sometimes a new gun will have a little bit of a rattle to it, and that's okay, but like something like a Smith & Wesson revolver should not make any sound in your hand. Don't let the Foley guys on the Hollywood movies fool you.
So, like you said, Weird, I mean, shaking it around, stuff like that. And when you open the gun up, also, the cylinder shouldn't hang up when you open it. The cylinder latch you push with your thumb should operate smoothly. It shouldn't have any hitches in it. And make sure the cylinder crane swings out smoothly when it's opened and when it's closed. And please don't do the movie thing, like you said, where you slam the cylinder shut, because it'll probably get you kicked out of the gun shop. But just make sure that swings out smoothly. And some revolvers also have fixed ejector rods, and others have screw-in ejector rods. Most of the Ruger double-action revolvers used a fixed ejector rod that does not spin with the cylinder. It's completely independent. Whereas the Smith & Wesson revolvers use a screw-in ejector rod, which can become unscrewed and cause your revolver to jam up. So make sure you pay particular attention to that, because that did happen to me with my Model 66. I was shooting first shot, second shot, and then the third shot I could barely pull the trigger back, and it turns out the ejector rod had actually backed out and unscrewed. Make sure the ejector rod operates smoothly by ejecting some snap caps, and make sure it returns to the forward position smoothly and under its own spring power. You shouldn't have to drag it back through it. You should push it, and it should just snap right back just by you letting it go. And then try to take and place the revolver on a flat surface with the ejector rod perpendicular to some sort of straight edge, and spin the ejector rod and just check for any wobbling or run out, because that can indicate a bent ejector rod, which can cause the cylinder to bind as well.
Yep. Also note that some revolvers, the crane will slide out with a little bit of force, and that's actually a good sign, because a lot of revolvers that come fresh out of the factory will be very, very tight, just like if you ever handle a brand new break action shotgun, you don't just turn the locking lug to the side and it just flops open like an older one will. A new one, you might have to put a little force on the barrels to pop it open. Same thing with the cylinder of a revolver. and just make sure again that it's smoothly moving. It might have a little bit of force, but that'll handle with time. You can just open and close the cylinder, a few dozen times, and that tends to loosen it up a little bit.
Yeah, revolvers are really finicky sometimes because you want to look at all these different things that could cause problems. I mean, may not cause problems now, but if they keep going, they may cause problems down the road. One thing that can cause problems down the road, and I've had to be particularly cognizant of this, is checking the barrel forcing cone. My Model 19 has a reputation of having problems with the forcing cone, under cracks, stuff like that. So with the older Smith & Wessons in particular, make sure there are no cracks or splits or damage to the forcing cone. The forcing cone is the area where the bullet comes out of the chamber and actually enters the barrel of the revolver, and it's one of the highest wear areas on the revolver. So damage here can really affect accuracy very greatly, and it also can lead to a dangerous situation where if the cylinder isn't lined up properly, you have lead shavings, and people standing to the side of the gun could potentially get struck by those. So you don't want that either. One of the other really important things in terms of timing, like we said there, is to check the cylinder stop in the bottom of the cylinder window. It should be undamaged and have sharp, defined edges, and then take a small punch or a pen or something and push it down, and it should spring back up under its own power. And you're going to want to look at the condition of the hand in the back of the cylinder window also. That's what moves the revolver as you pull the trigger or cock back the hammer rather. And it should move upward smoothly and should have a sharp, defined edge. And look at the ratchet notches on the back of the cylinder as well, and ensure that they're not excessively worn, because if they are worn, that can also cause timing issues where the cylinder isn't pushed as far as it needs to be for it to properly lock up for the next shot. Have you ever had any problems with those, Weird?
Well, like I said, I had my Model 617 did end up going out of time, and that was actually, you couldn't even see I couldn't even see any of the problems with it. But Smith & Wesson did end up replacing the ratchet and the whole star and the timing pawl. And that worked out fine. But one of the tricks that I've actually learned for just doing kind of a rudimentary timing check on a revolver. Now this is a little bit dodgy, so listen closely. You want to make sure the gun is unloaded, and then you want to make sure the gun is unloaded, and you want to make sure that there's no ammo anywhere around you whatsoever, just in case, and all of that. But what you can do is you can take a flashlight and hold it behind the recoil shield, so the very, very back part of the cylinder. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look down the barrel and cock the hammer. And what you should see is just concentric rings down the barrel, because the light's going to go onto the breech face of the revolver, and it's going to shine up through the cylinder holes. And if you've got one that's a little bit off, it's going to be very, very noticeable.
That's definitely something you want to make sure there is no ammo in the house for.
Yeah. Also, another interesting thing about end shake is a little bit of end shake play is okay, but one thing to test for is to pull the trigger of the gun all the way back and get the hammer to drop on the gun. And at that point in time, the gun is in full lockup, and that gun is as locked as it's ever going to be in any sort of condition. And in that case, the cylinder should have almost no play in it whatsoever, and that really is a good sign that revolver is in very, very, very good shape.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. That's. I think the Smith and the Colt, they have different times when they lock up. I do know that. The Ruger locks up almost just before the hammer falls through a double action pull. The Smith, I think, is the same way. Or actually, sorry, the Ruger is earlier, and the Smith is just before it falls, and I'm pretty sure the Colt is pretty much the same way. The Ruger locks up really early. I noticed that when I hunted with a Red Hawk last year.
But either way, if the trigger is as far back as it's ever going to go, and you haven't let that trigger reset at all, it is going to be in full lockup.
So, like we said before also, and it's really important in terms of accuracy, is check the muzzle crown and ensure that it's not damaged and that the edges are sharp and defined. A damaged muzzle crown can severely affect accuracy. I had not a handgun, but a .22 rifle, and it was shooting very poorly. I looked at the crown, and I had bought the rifle used, and the crown was damaged, so I had it cut back and recrowned, and it's now one of the most accurate rifles I own, and it was like an $80 .22 rifle. So the damaged muzzle crown can make a world of difference. Have you ever had any of yours get damaged, Weird?
No, I haven't, but that's something I look for because, as a general rule, if the crown's getting dinged up, that means that gun's been involved in some rough trade, and that's a surefire way to know that somebody didn't know how to handle that gun. And if they didn't know, that you've really got to be careful on letting your muzzle bump into stuff and dropping it and putting it down into the dirt, which can cause a barrel obstruction and things like that. I mean, just the muzzle is one of those things that you absolutely have to baby on a firearm, and it's something you should always be aware of with the safety rules. And if somebody's bouncing it off of hard enough surfaces to damage the hardened material that muzzle's made of, you might want to pass on that one.
Definitely. And we were talking about timing before, but here's sort of a procedure to check your timing again. We talked about how important the lockup was after the hammer has fallen and you're holding the double action trigger pull back, just like you just fired the gun. But to check the single and the double action timing, you're going to do this by making sure the revolver is unloaded, again, always. And you're going to slowly cock the revolver 6 times. And some people like to impart a little bit of drag on the cylinder with their finger just by lightly brushing up against the cylinder with their finger. But you're going to slowly cock the revolver 6 times, and you're going to ensure that the cylinder stop snaps up into the corresponding notch in the cylinder just before the hammer reaches full cock. To check the double action timing, you're going to pull the trigger very slowly through the double action stroke, and the cylinder stop should snap up into the notch and lock the cylinder just before the hammer falls. So that's really important. That's like the number one most important check on a revolver, is to make sure that that is happening, because if it's not, then you have a revolver that's out of time, and that's going to severely affect the price, especially if you have to send it in and get it fixed from someone that may not do it for free, like Smith & Wesson did for Weird. And then finally, really the last thing you're going to want to check is the barrel cylinder gap. Now, you can do this using a set of feeler gauges. You can buy these at any auto parts store. I believe they use them for checking spark plugs. I'm not much of a mechanic. I'm more of a gun guy. But they're just strips of metal of varying incremental thicknesses. So you're going to use these gauges, and you can check the minimum and the maximum barrel cylinder gap and compare these measurements to specifications from the manufacturer to ensure they're within accepted tolerances. Barrel cylinder gap is basically the space from the front of the cylinder where the bullet exits and the space between that and the front of the forcing cone where the bullet's going to enter the barrel of the revolver. Having excessive barrel cylinder gap can cause excessive lead spitting, particulate gases escaping on firing, and many other unpleasant things. So having too little barrel cylinder gap, on the other hand, can cause the revolver to bind up from fouling just after a few shots.
Yeah, that's also another reason to import a little bit of drag with your thumb or something on the gun, because that will imitate a gun that's gotten a little bit of powder fouling on it. And so, the gun may be, in fairly clean condition in the dealer rack. Though I don't know any dealer that really goes through and gets a good scrubbing on their guns. They're usually pretty dirty. But if they get a gun that's particularly filthy, they'll clean it up. But a gun that is very, very clean and well-oiled might run really, really well. But when you take it out to the range, or if it's been riding in your holster all day, sort of such situation, it might pick up a little bit of dust or dirt or grit or something like that. And it should be tight enough and functioning enough that it's going to do everything just right without that little bit of dirt, because a little bit of dirt is not something you want to get messed up, and that's the same issue with the gap. If there's a little bit of dirt in there and that gap is crazy tight, that's not good. Unless, of course, it's like a bullseye shooting revolver or something like that, in which case those guys are going to be cleaning them in between strings and stuff like that, and the tighter that gap, the better your accuracy is going to be. But that's for very, 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 very specific revolvers. So don't go, it's a really tight cylinder gap. But if it's if that's a defensive type revolver or a hunting type revolver, that's not what you want.
Yeah, that's I've experienced that, and it was kind of weird because I'd never had that happen to me on my smokeless powder revolvers, the cartridge guns. But when I got that black powder revolver, I'd shoot 6 rounds, and then I'd go and take another shot, and it was really hard to pull the hammer back. And it was like, wow, I'd heard about black powder guns fouling up like that, but I'd never actually experienced it till I shot one.
Yeah, the black powder makes things really, really dirty. I need to get one someday.
Definitely, yeah, they're really nice. So we're going to move into the semi-auto pistols here. Now,
actually, one more thing that you missed before we move on is nothing to check on a revolver is check the top strap right by the forcing cone and look to make sure that there's not any metal eroded. Now, some gun manufacturers will put a little bit of a radius cut right over there just to give some space for that gas to cool down. But what you don't want is you don't want it to look like someone's been welding away at that with an acetylene torch or something. That's from the gases burning into the top strap, and that means the top strap's weakened. And when your top strap goes, your gun's pretty much gone.
Yeah, I actually noticed that on that Rossi Princess 22 I was firing because it was so old, and I think it was made out of Zamac. Yep. And I think someone maybe fired too many of those CCI stingers through it or something like that and caused it to really cut up into that top strap.
Yeah, another thing to worry about is especially your really, really powerful Magnum guns, because especially the older ones, some of those had real major problems with excessive flame cutting just because the steel of the day wasn't as good, and that those rounds were fairly new and super duper duper hot, and people didn't know quite how bulky they needed to build them up. And if you need to know how much you need a top strap for, just look at a Ruger revolver. They make those top straps unbelievably thick, and they do it for a reason. But also, it could mean that just that gun has been shot a lot and shot with a lot of full house loads, and so you really need to be cautious about it because that gun's been run real, real hard, and so it may be the equivalent of a super high mileage automobile. Doesn't mean it's not good, but it does mean that you need to proceed with caution because that gun's been used an awful lot.
Definitely something you want to pay attention to. So we're going to move into the semi-auto pistols, and I'll let you probably take the first few points here, Weird. But in terms of semi-auto pistols, you can use most of the techniques discussed above in the revolver section to examine the aesthetics of the handgun. And this section is going to mostly cover the different mechanical checks to ensure that the handgun will function properly and safely. So you want to take the first couple points, Weird, and then we can discuss.
Yeah, sure. You want to ensure that all your external controls are in their proper place and function positively. So you want to do stuff like flip the gun on safe and make sure that the safety does indeed make the gun not work. A little bit of research might be good to see how that gun's supposed to work, because some guns, you put the safety on it locks the gun up tight, so that trigger's not going to move at all. Others, it disengages the trigger, so that trigger is just going to bounce back and forth when you pull it. It's going to just be spongy and not do anything. You want to make sure that you know what your gun's supposed to do, because a gun where the trigger is supposed to stay in place when the safety's on and the trigger moves around is not a good condition. And a gun that the trigger is supposed to move on and yet it suddenly locks up when the safety's on, that also is a bad sign. And you want to do everything like that. Like, so if it's a Springfield XD or a 1911, you want to make sure that grip safety is working. Any of those guns like the Glocks that have the trigger inside the trigger, you want to try pulling the essentially the primary trigger without pushing that internal secondary trigger, and just make sure that thing is not going to clear, because that's part of the safety feature. And see if if the gun's got a magazine disconnect. I guess you can check to see if it works or not, but if it doesn't work with the magazine disconnect, that might be a good thing.
Did you ever get your magazine disconnect fixed on your M&P, or have you done that yet?
No, I haven't done that yet. I'm probably going to do that Thursday or Friday, depending on how much time I've got.
I know a lot of people have issues with those. I mean, I don't care for them, but I haven't really owned a handgun besides my Browning High Power, and the one that I bought used actually had that deactivated. So I didn't have to worry about that. But most of the Browning High Powers, I believe, do have that. They haven't taken that out of the newer editions, have they?
I don't believe so. I believe the new ones still have the magazine disconnect. But there's a bunch of guns out there that have them. One of actually the used guns that you're going to see a lot of these days, and the prices are starting to go up on them, are the Smith & Wesson original semi-autos, the all steel or all steel and aluminum semi-autos, and those ones all had magazine disconnects, and they're a little bit finicky to remove, but you can remove them, and all of that. But I personally don't like them, only because it's possible, especially with a gun riding in a holster, that the gun might bounce around a little bit, and you might get that magazine to bump off just a little bit. And it doesn't take the magazine to off-seat very much before that magazine disconnect engages, and that could be bad news if it's a defensive gun. If it's a range gun, who cares? My Colt 1908 has a magazine disconnect in it, and I'm not going to do any. I don't even know if you can remove it easily. I'm not going to, because that's a collector's item, and I want to have it as factory original as possible.
And that's the thing. Oftentimes the reason that I have a problem with them, it wouldn't be a make or break deal. If I really wanted a gun and it had that, I'd be like, well, okay. But oftentimes, and particularly on the Browning High Power, the magazine disconnect safety will oftentimes make the trigger really gritty and hard to pull. And that's not the case with every gun that has one, but oftentimes it can have that unintended consequence.
Yeah, that's specifically how the high power works, and a lot of other guns use a very similar faction. But yeah, there's just a whole lot more bearing surface when that magazine disconnect is engaged, and that causes a lot more drag on the trigger pull. Another thing that does that, but not always, if it's tuned up just right, is your guns that have like the Colt Series 80 firing pin block, which is activated off the triggers. Sometimes you will feel a very, very gritty point in the trigger just before it breaks, and that's that plunger moving up and down. That's not, I mean, it depends on how finicky you're going to get. That's something that you might be able to take it apart and polish up those pieces and, and make it a little bit better, or simply shoot the gun a bunch of times, and that'll wear it in a little bit more. But, certain safety features can definitely make the gun a little bit less shootable.
Now, in terms of checking something like the quote-unquote timing on a semi-auto pistol, what can we do to make sure the gun locks up properly?
Well, the easiest one to do is to let the slide go all the way forward, and then that gun should be fully locked up, and so it should come perfectly closed, and everything should line up just right. And then you can push down on the barrel hood, and if the gun's got a lot of wear on the locking components, it'll have some wiggle in that, and that is a nightmare to fix. So it's a good idea just to walk away at that point, because you're going to lose a lot of your savings fixing that gun unless it's a warranty issue. And then what you want to do is slowly of course this is for lock breech guns, you should slowly ease the slide back, and you should see the barrel travel with the slide, and then you should see it unlock however it unlocks. Some guns it's not noticeable, like with a Beretta 92, because the locking block is inside the gun. But for all your Browning actions, your 1911s, your Browning high powers, Glocks, Sig Sauers, pretty much most, 90% of all the handguns you're going to find, it's going to have a tilting barrel, and so you're going to see that barrel drop down, and it should drop down nice and smoothly, and that's a very good sign.
One of the guns you won't see that on is the Colt 1903, because even though that looks like it may have a Browning tilt lock system, it is actually a fixed barrel that's held in place by lugs inside the gun. So that's one thing to watch out for. I remember when I first looked at the 1903 in magazines, I was like, oh, that looks like a tilt locking gun. I didn't know they could do that in 380, but I found out otherwise when I actually finally purchased one.
Yeah, they look a little bit weird because the barrel's not fixed to the gun the same way. When you tear apart a Walther PPK or a High Point or something like that, that barrel's is just stuck there, and so it's always in the firing position no matter what you do. But with those guns, you have to turn the barrel out of the locking lugs. But essentially, it's in a fixed position. It's just being held in place by the slide.
Right. So kind of moving on with looking at the barrel and the locking system, if you can, and this isn't possible all the time, especially with a more strange gun, and I actually kind of have a good story to share about after this, but if possible, disassemble the gun so you can inspect the barrel and the chamber. Ensure there's no rust in the chamber and that the bore is bright and shiny and the rifling looks clear-cut and well-defined. And any imperfections inside the chamber can cause cases to get stuck upon firing. So if you have like a little bit of rust in the chamber, maybe someone did clean it out, but if that left some pitting in there, that brass, when it pressurizes, is going to form to fit that chamber, and it's going to form to fit that rust as well, and that could cause the case to get stuck in there, and you may not be able to have it get out of there with just the power of the extractor.
Yep, and another thing is if they won't, of course, you can, it's always good to ask the owner of the gun, may I take this gun apart? If they say no, ask, can you take this gun apart for me? Because they may not trust you to take the gun apart without buggering it up, but they should know how to do it. So, and just then you can just see, and it's a good way to look inside the gun. You might see dust and dirt and grit and things like that inside the gun. Especially pocket guns. You'll often see a lot of like fuzz and lint and things like that in it, just from pocket carrying and not a good cleaning before it made it into the dealer's cabinet. But that stuff can get cleaned away. But you want to look for rust and pitting and scratched up metal. Anything that's like, if there's one piece that's mostly got a little bit of a patina on it, but then it's got a really, really shiny spot, you might want to figure out why the heck that thing's been worn shiny.
Well, and the other thing, and the funny story is, I went into a gun shop, or it was a pawn shop, gun shop that I frequent around here, and I believe it was a Polish P64. You have one of those, White Rid?
I do.
Okay. So
and they're all terrible. So if you pick up the gun and it's terrible, then you've picked up a good model. That's how they came from the factory.
Well, it wasn't even that. So this customer had came in, and the guy that runs the store is pretty knowledgeable, but he's also one of those people that knows when he shouldn't mess with something, which is good because there's not a lot of people out there that know that. And so he was showing a customer this P64 that he had in the gun case, and the customer asked if he could take it apart. And he said, well, I haven't actually looked up how to take it apart. I'm not familiar with the gun, so I don't really know how. He was honest with the guy. And the guy said, oh, I can figure it out. So he took the gun apart and basically detail stripped it. And then he tried to put it back together. Well, unbeknownst to the owner, the guy left, guy didn't buy it. The owner picked up the P64, pulled the trigger, nothing would happen. Hammer wouldn't go back, nothing. So I came in a few hours later, and he was like, Ryan, do you know anything about the Polish P64? And I said, no, I've seen it. I mean, I've not taken one apart. I spent 3 hours trying to figure out what this guy did to this P64 to make it not work. And it turns out he didn't connect. There's a trigger bar on that gun, right, on the right-hand side?
Yep. Yeah. It's essentially a Walther PPK clone, so they're very, very similar all over.
I don't remember exactly how he hooked it up, but he hooked it up somehow, and it didn't engage the hammer and the sear and that whole assembly out back. And so with a little bit of fiddling, a little bit of looking online at schematics, I was able to figure it out. And it turns out that he had a guy come in after that and wanted to buy the gun, but when he went to pull the trigger and try out the double action trigger pull, it wouldn't work.
Oh,
and the guy was coming back in a half hour to buy the gun if he could get it fixed.
Oh, that's neat.
So I fixed it for him, and I waited. I went around looking around the shop. The guy came back and bought the gun, so that was really cool. I was glad I could help him out because that's where I bought my Model 60.
Did you get a box of ammo out of that? You should have.
No, but I got a discount on my Model 60.
Oh, nice. But yeah, no, I've got a very, very similar story to that. Now that I hear what went wrong was my friend Wally of York Arms, YorkArms.com in Hollis, Maine. He ended up picking up a Car P9, so the slightly larger Car 9mm pocket pistol, and someone had done the exact same thing. They had detailed stripped the gun, and they had not hooked up the trigger bar. I don't detail strip guns very much. They make me go into a cold sweat. When I do my M&P 9C, I'm going to be doing a cold sweat. I'm always terrified I'm going to put them together wrong, and I've never put them together wrong, but I'm terrified of it. That's probably why I've never put them together wrong. But you can get those trigger bars set up just a little bit wrong, so it's not engaging in the right way or it's not going back far enough. And the guy had done that wrong, and so it was not a working gun. But he figured he had a pretty good idea what was wrong with the gun, and so he bought it for really, really, really cheap. Took it home, tore it apart, looked at some schematics, and got it working again. And there it is. Of course, this is a guy that makes AR-15s, so he's a little bit better than your average bear. But it's not. But as far as I've seen from the schematics, it's not that difficult to fix. So sometimes you might see something that's a little bit buggered up and doesn't work. And actually, one thing that I was thinking about with the person that brought back that used Sig Sauer, it was a Sig Sauer. And I'm going to say that now because I'm going to say if that gun ended up getting into the used rack, number one, it probably didn't have more than 50 or 100 rounds through it because the guy had pretty much taken it to the range and then took it right back to the shop and says, yeah, this gun jammed up on me a bunch of times. Sometimes people will buy a brand new gun and take it back because it doesn't work. And it could be something as simple as when guns come from the factory, they're shipped with packing grease in them and all that, so they don't rust when they're on the box cars traveling across the country. And sometimes that stuff's it's similar to Cosmoline a little bit in the fact that it's just this big goopy gloppy crap. And if it's not properly cleaned off, you can have things bind up. You can have the slide not move as quickly as it needs to be and all that, or someone didn't properly lubricate it. So sometimes you'll get somebody who will say, this gun didn't work out well. Know what problems can happen with guns. I also know, I don't know if you put the links in the post, but I sent you a link from a guy who used to blog a lot, Xavier from XavierThoughts.blogspot.com, and he picked up a 1911 that someone had shot a few times and just decided it was a piece of crap gun and taken it back to the shop. And he asked the guy what shop he had taken it to, because this guy just had not done any lubrication or anything like that to the gun. So the gun was bone dry and had gotten fouled up and dirty and was just not going to run anymore. But all you had to do was tear it down, give it a really, really good cleaning, properly lube it up, and the gun worked beautifully.
Yeah, those will be included in the show notes. And it's interesting. The one thing that I found, and I've done it the past few guns I've bought, is if I have an idea, and it may be a good idea to do this for yourself, is I have an idea of what gun I want to buy or what brand I want to buy. I look online and I look at the various problems that have been, talked about with the guns. So that way, when I go look at these used guns, I know what may be some problems. With the Model 19s, I knew that there may be some flame cutting issues. With the Colt 1903, I knew there may be some magazine availability or parts availability issues. So it's kind of advantageous to make sure you go and do your research. Don't just buy on a whim sometimes, because that way you can kind of, anticipate some of the problems you might face with that particular handgun. So moving on, basically, the last 2 points here is examine the slide for cracks or any other small imperfections. The slide on a semi-auto can be a very high-stress part, and some of the cheaper firearms may have not had their slides properly heat-treated, or they may be made out of some sort of a Zamac alloy, which is I don't even know, weird. Do you know what Zamac's made out of? I don't have it here.
It's like 90% zinc. It's mostly zinc with a few other stuff. I don't think anybody actually knows what Zamac's made of, because I'm pretty sure it's a proprietary material. So I believe that's actually a trademarked term. So the people that make it, I think it's made by DuPont, but I'm just flying off the cuff here. I might be wrong on that, but I know it's a trademark name, so I don't think anyone knows exactly what's in it. But it's mostly zinc. It's going to behave mostly like zinc, and so because of that, it's got a fairly low melting point and stuff like that, and it can get brittle.
Definitely. And then the other thing, and also before I actually go on from the slide part, that's one of the most high-stress parts of the gun, typically. With the revolver, typically the most high-stress part is either the cylinder or the recoil shield, where the cases push up against the back. So you want to make sure that has no cracks, because that can happen, and it's really important. I just want to stress that.
Another thing to look at is the slide rails. It's the yin to the yang of the slide is the rails that it mounts on. Especially with newer guns, they've actually started minimizing the slide rails, and you would think that a lot of guns just have 2 tabs in the front and 2 tabs in the back, and you would think that's worse, but it's actually better. And newer 1911s actually have a cutout right by where this slide stops pin is, for the exact reason is that spot has a real long section of slide rail, and that thing can get flex on it under recoil, and eventually it'll start to crack. And you want to make sure that there aren't any cracks around that. And even if you don't take the gun apart, you can look and see where the rails and the slide made up, and you can look to see if there's any real cracks or imperfections or stuff like that, which might show that the gun might be starting to get into its later years. If you're looking at like a CC75, I have no idea, because those slide rails are way on the inside.
Yeah, definitely. So make sure you look at those slide rails. Those are really important, like he said there. And then also one thing, the last thing we got here is it's often overlooked, but ensure that the gun has a magazine with it. Some older, more obscure guns can have very hard to find or expensive magazines. Magazines for my Colt 1903 can run into the $100 range, so make sure the magazine functions positively and smoothly and snaps right up. And a worn magazine can be the cause of many functioning issues, so don't discount the gun right away if you do encounter malfunctioning issues, because it can be traced right to a bad magazine.
Yep, and on a similar side of it is look to see the manufacturer of the magazine, because a lot of, especially since I'm a 1911 shooter and a 1911 buyer and all of that, and there's a ton of aftermarket magazines out there. The same thing goes with any of your real popular guns like Glocks and Sig Sauers and Berettas and things like that. There's a lot of different companies that make aftermarket magazines for them, and look to see the make of the magazine and all of that, and that might also be something to factor in. It might actually sometimes be a good thing, because you can you just get rid of those magazines and buy new ones, but always factor it in. If you need to buy 3 or 4 new magazines, if the gun comes with 4 magazines, but that they're of a dodgy quality, then you need to you need to make note of that. If the gun comes with if it's a 1911 and it comes with but it comes with 5 magazines, so I'm gonna charge you a little bit more because you're getting a whole package. But if those are some more dodgy magazines, or you can't even see where they're made from, and that particular make of gun came with a certain factory type of magazine, because not all 1911 makers actually make their magazines. I know Smith & Wesson makes some fantastic 1911s. What they don't make is 1911 magazines. So look to see if there's a brand stamping. I know Smith & Wesson, they don't make their magazines, but they stamp them Smith & Wesson before they leave from the factory, and that can be just another thing just to look for. Because a lot of people might end up, buy a 1911 and go, oh, that one's not good, but they've got 3 or 4 others at home. They'll keep the good magazines for themselves, and they'll throw in, a few of their odd ducks or the magazines that don't work anymore into the package, just so the dealer's buying a gun, taking a gun from them with a magazine.
Right. So pretty much wrapping up, if the handgun passes all these tests we've talked about, then it should be a fairly safe used buy. But follow your gut, and if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Go ahead and cross-check online prices for used guns similar to the one you're looking at to make sure the price you're paying is in the right ballpark. Inspect the gun carefully, and if possible, test fire it. A lot of private sellers will let you test fire the handgun if you just ask, and if you seem like you're ready to close a deal and all you need to do is test fire it, they probably will allow you to. Even if you have your own ammo, that might even sweeten the pot a little bit. Even if you can't test fire the gun, if it passes the inspections outlined above, you can feel pretty confident the gun will work out well for you. Any other thoughts on this before we wrap up the main topic, Weird?
Well, another thing, even if you're not test firing the gun yet, make sure you feel the trigger of the gun, because some guns, there's a lot of variation within the trigger. Some of them will have, especially look at a gun magazine, and you'll see under the trigger weight, there might be a huge range. It might be a trigger range between 4 and 6.5 pounds. Wow, that's a pretty big range on there. You might want to get one that's got a little bit on the lighter side of it or all that, or you might get a gun that has a little bit of a rougher trigger or a little bit of a creepier trigger or all of that. And that all depends on your feelings. If I pick up a revolver and it's got a little bit of a rough trigger, you can just dry fire that gun 1,000 times, and that'll probably work a lot of that out if it's a good revolver. But yeah, some guns have been tinkered with or messed around with, or someone's gone through. If there's a really excessively light trigger pull, that might not be a good idea. One other thing that's actually very, very, very specific to 1911s is one of the things that a lot of people will do to try to improve the reliability of a 1911, and overall they're fairly reliable guns anyway. Probably they were just using bad magazines, but they'll polish the feed ramp. Now with a 1911, it's got 2 feed ramps. It's got one feed ramp on the barrel, and it's got another one on the frame. And some guys have thought, it's a really good idea is I'll polish so that frame feed ramp lines up with the feed ramp of the barrel, and that can actually end up ruining your gun. And so you want to make sure that again, you said, unless the gun's been modified by a well-known, manufacturer, just stay away from it. But that's one of those modifications that's really a no-go.
Yeah, definitely. Some of those, home kitchen gunsmith stuff can really actually damage the gun. I mean, if they accidentally polish the barrel a little bit too much, it's okay, I have to buy a new barrel. But if they polish the frame, I mean, you could pretty much screw that frame up. Yep.
The same thing goes with, if you've got a gun that's got an unbelievably light trigger, and this is a gun that you'll want to carry, and you're actually going to worry about sear engagement and the hammer slipping off the sear, you may end up having to buy a whole new, all the sear and the hammer engagement point and all of that, and that could get you into a lot more money. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. When I bought my Carry 1911, my 1911 SC, I saw it online on the dealer's page, and I pretty much went into the shop, and they were offering it at such a low price that I just said, so long as the frame isn't screwed up on the gun and it's just not a total rust bucket, I'm walking out with that gun, because I can turn around and take it to my gunsmith, and I can pay him to fix whatever problems they got, including something like dropping in a new barrel or something like that. And that I'm still going to be under the price of what a lot of the guns were going for. So sometimes too good to be true prices are okay. It actually turned out with this gun, it had a lot of holster wear on it, and somebody had taken the rosewood grips and spray painted them black. And that made it was just a weird, whatever personal preference they had, and it just made the gun look absolutely hideous. But I took those grips off and threw them in the trash and put some new grips on.
I mean, that's the thing. You have to be aware of what these sort of modifications are going to cost you, because if you know, like, well, okay, the gun has a worn barrel, but I can get one for, $90, then it may still be worth it, because even with that investment in the new barrel, you're still coming out well below the MSRP of a new gun.
Yep.
So that about wraps up our main topics. We're going to head into the wrap-up section. So LA Police Gear is a sponsor of Gun Guy Radio. You can visit their website at lapolicegear.com. And for this week, I have chosen the Timney 2 3/4 pound pull weight trigger pack, which is retailing for $229.94. And that is on the LA Police Gear website. It's a new edition, and it is basically a 1022 trigger pack that can just basically drop in. It will change the way you think about your trigger forever. It's available with a factory 3 or 4 pound pull, and you can even go down to 2 3/4. It's a self-contained unit that replaces your standard trigger in minutes using the same hammer and trigger pins. And the solid straight design of the trigger shoe is better for competitive events and helping the shooter to pull the trigger straight back to the rear without influencing the rifle's alignment with the target. So you can, there's a link in the show notes to that piece of gear. You can go over and visit them at lapolicegear.com. They have a 365-day return policy and free shipping on all orders over $89. Also, Duluth Trading sponsors Gun Guy Radio. You could visit their affiliate link at gunguyradio.com/Duluth. And for this week, I've chosen the Duluth Longtail Tee with pocket, and that's retailing for $19.50 over there. I really, one of my pet peeves is having my T-shirt become untucked when I do have my shirt tucked in, which is not very often. But to alleviate this, the Duluth Longtail Tee has a few extra inches of material, which allows you to keep your T-shirt tucked in very nicely. And now they have it with a pocket on the front. So they also have free shipping on $50 orders and up, so be sure to go check them out, Duluth Trading, and there is a link in the show notes.
Back to the Brownells Product Spotlight on Gun Guy Radio, and we have category manager Paul Levy on the line. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Jake. How's it going?
It's going great. So we're talking a little M14 M1A chassis this week, the Sage International EBR Enhanced Battle Rifle chassis.
Yeah, we don't see a lot of new parts for the M1A M14. This has actually been out for a little while. But the reason why we're talking about it today is, it's pretty cool, and also it was a part used by the military. This chassis was in service basically the past 8 years or so. I don't know the exact dates. Used by various units in the Army, Marine Corps, basically as upgraded M14 M1As. I don't know if I can get the whole thing on camera here at once, but this is the EBR chassis. The one that Brownells carries, this is the same one that the military used. And what it basically is an aluminum stock chassis for your M1A. It replaces your fiberglass or your walnut stock on your M1A. And the reason why the military went with this is obviously a material like aluminum, you're not having flex or warpage, anything like that. It's a rigid mounting platform for optics. And what this was used for was the designated marksman role. So the squad marksman or the platoon marksman, he had an M1A with an optic, and he was the guy to gauge targets at long range. And that was a great capability that they didn't have at the time anyways. Really some pretty neat features on it. Obviously the quite long rail up front, plenty of Picatinny rail for mounting optics in front. You could put a red dot up here, or you could put a traditional optic and then your night vision in front of that. Lights, you can mount vertical grips, of course, and then it has this nice kind Kydex heat shield. So if it warms up on any, it's not going to matter. The Kydex is pretty robust. It's attached well. The whole thing, when you pick this up, it's not flimsy. This thing is well built and robust.
Looks like a beast, man.
Yeah, it's about 5 pounds. So when you get an entire rifle, it's not going to be lightweight, but that will bring some accuracy potential to your M1A M14. And probably one of those factors that really drives that, I don't know if you can see inside there. It's still zip tied together, the bushing anyways. But there's a guide or the guide for the guide rods for the M1A, so that it's not just in the stock. It's not using the standard one. This one's obviously fitted to the chassis. It's precision fitted, so your guide rod will end up in the same place every time, so you don't have any chance of throwing off accuracy. Just one of those other things they thought of in the chassis design. And then the part that everybody notices right away on this is the stock itself. So if you have optics mounted, you've got the cheek piece here that's adjustable. You can adjust that up and down. And then, of course, the stock itself, you can adjust to the rear, which you can see there. You depress this lever inside, and then you can adjust the stock back and forth. So
very cool. And, it gives you a way to mount a red dot or like a scout-style scope. So it'll collapse all the way like that, but also has this Picatinny space right here. I'm guessing most guys probably use this rear portion for mounting a sling, but they could also mount a PVS 14 or something like that behind their red dot. Oh, you could? Yeah. I didn't even notice that. Huh.
Yeah, so when you have your M1A receiver here, we're also going to be carrying a adapter for it, a rail that extends to the rear over the receiver. You can use your traditional M1A M14 scope mounts with this, but we'll also have one from Sage, which is in line with this rail, and then mounts securely to your receiver and then to the chassis as well. We'll have that other product as well. There's also sling mounts built in. These will work for your HK style sling hooks right there on the front and then on the rear. This one's ambi. You can mount on either side. And then this one on the front, you can swap your side. That one there. And then, of course, you can attach whatever QD attachment you might want on the Picatinny rails. And on the cheek piece, back to that moves up and down. And then your length of pull, you obviously can adjust basically by extending the stock. A lot of the pictures you see or older pictures you see of Army personnel using this, they're always walking around with the stock collapsed because getting in and out of vehicles, that's a little handier. You can see how much shorter that is. Instead of a full-length stock on an M14, that's a bit handier. And then they do have the rubberized grip as well with the storage.
Oh, they do? Okay, very cool. Yeah, I really like the fact that it has the cheek riser and everything on it, too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because without that, you mount an optic, you're not – if you mount a normal optic on an M1A without a cheek piece – you're not getting any cheek weld. Your head's floating up there and just trying to look through it.
Right. So, very, very cool, very innovative. You can check the show notes for this episode. I'll have a direct link to the EBR or Enhanced Battle Rifle Chassis by Sage. So very cool. Check that out at Brownells. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing this. Can't wait to see what you have next week.
All right. Talk to you then.
Coming in July, we have our patron project, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more in July when Jake comes back from his sabbatical, so be sure to stay tuned on that. And also, there's an AR-15 rifle giveaway, so enter by subscribing to our email newsletter and going to gunguyradio.com/winner. And also, Ryan Cross, Hunter of Design, does all the artwork for the Firearms Radio Network and also hosts the Firearms Insider Gun and Gear podcast, Gun and Gear Review podcast. So be sure to check that out, hunterofdesign.com. So please share your thoughts by leaving a comment at the bottom of this week's show notes or the YouTube video for this week's episode. And remember to subscribe to us on iTunes so that you never miss a show, and please leave us a review there as well, gunguyradio.com/iTunes. Be sure to go and join the NRA. We have a link there in the show notes. And join the Second Amendment Foundation and help support them. And don't forget to shop Brownells using our affiliate link, gunguyradio.com/satisfaction. And you can also contribute to the show by shopping Amazon.com by any of the banner links on the side of the page. And don't forget to check out all the other shows on the Firearms Radio Network. Subscribe and listen for free at firearmsradio.tv/iTunes. So thanks for coming on, Weird, and where can people find you?
You can find me at my blog at weirdworld.com, and you can find me every Thursday evening at 9 p.m. at SQRPT.com, the Squirrel Report. It's a call-in radio show. Come on in, join in, and call in, or listen to the podcast after the fact.
Excellent. Yeah, be sure to go check those out. There will be links in the show notes to both of those. So, as always, thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
This has been a production of the Firearms Radio Network. You can find more information at firearmsradio.tv.